All right, case time. It's actually been a long time since Phanteks came out with an Evolv. The first Evolv, to be fair, had some not so good airflow characteristics, leading to companies like the Mod My Mods to come out with like their CNC machined like panels for more airflow and stuff. But this is the Evolv X2. It shares nothing from the previous Evolvs, but I'm actually really looking forward to testing this because it has a huge feature set that I think might actually do really well with today's hardware. So while I unbox this real quick, full disclosure, Phanteks did send us this case to kind of take a look at and do a build in. I want to do full temperature and flow characteristics and stuff, but right now, obviously, we are very occupied with the 50 series launch, so we'll have to double back on this one. But today's video is gonna be more about the build experience in there, what you can fit and all of that. So I don't like to do multi-part type stuff, but really it just comes down to logistics and time at the moment. When we talk about airflow though, look at the top. Kind of feels a little derivative of maybe like a height case, but you know what? It's got a huge amount of opening right there. It is a little bit of an angle though. I feel like that's for aesthetic purposes. It would have been nice to have it be straight because the angled is gonna force a little bit of resistance to the exhaust. And it does have a non-removable mesh in here, so which also doubles as the air filter. Although this is almost always exhaust, I would probably, personally for me, cut this out. I would rather have unobstructed exhaust and let the dust that might accumulate here escape the chassis than to be trapped here. So that's kind of like, I think, one of the first mods I would do. You can see there's a contact pad right here to complete the circuit to the panels that do just detach. And here's that RGB strip right there. Which also has our button control for reset and actually it's just a push down. So the buttons are here. And then that's just an extension piece to be able to push the buttons. Okay, but if we take a look at the case airflow design, I'm going to take these out. They call it a quote unquote floating chassis. And I think the reason why they're doing that is you can see the bottom is not just feet, but it has this kind of an entire foot right here. This is awesome for a couple of reasons. You could set it on carpet and you don't have to worry about carpet fluffing up into the intake and starting to clog it up. So this has its own platform to sit on, whether it be on your desk, and it has massive rubber feet, as you can see, so it doesn't want to like slide around and push around, but it allows you to put it on soft surfaces without having it, you know, if you have thick plush carpet, that would just down in there and obstruct airflow. And considering the only place this chassis gets its air is through the bottom, that would be a problem. So this is a full updraft type of chassis. So all the air comes in through the bottom and updrafts through the chassis through either bottom fans that you're using to assist air up or top fans that are gonna be running an AIO, or I know they sent us these are the M5 120 G2s. It's kind of like these fans are actually screwed together. You can see the screws right here to daisy chain together and give you kind of a solid single fan, which is kind of nice. But you got 3 intakes on the bottom, 3 exhausts on the top, and a 120 exhaust in the rear. We'll just be running intake on the bottom and exhaust on the top today. Okay, so to remove the side panel here, there is a screw that you need to remove. It's actually pointed out right here. Then this pops off, but it's got pretty solid clips that still hold it in place. That screw is basically more for transit, the way it doesn't pop out. I do like the cut glass like this though. This isn't cheap. Anytime you make an extra cut in glass like this, it is not cheap to do that. So that is an aesthetic choice that has led to more cost. So you need to keep that in mind. So this is typically where you would have like fans or something, because a lot of case manufacturers like to utilize this back area. Not this. This was just utilized to kind of be an open, more of a design. You can see we have a semi-adjustable GPU anti-sag bracket right here. It is removable if it does happen to potentially, say, interfere with a fan or something on your GPU, but you get a somewhat decent amount of adjustment. If you need to go higher, you remove the bottom screw, and then you would just replace it, slide this up, replace it there, and then it can go up that much farther. So depending on where your slots spacing is on your motherboard will determine which one of these holes that you're going to use. And this is literally just a cover that allows you to be able to get to your 3.5-inch drive cage right there. It's a little loose right now from transit. It's just held in by a single thumb screw that's captive. And you can take that bracket out too. What I like though, is that it actually has flow-through vents. So if you were to leave this in, because let's say, maybe you're not using a hard drive or anything right now, but you never know later, you might throw, oh, I don't know, 10 terabyte drives are getting pretty cheap now when it comes to spinning drives. You want it as a mass storage drive. You can leave it in there so you don't potentially lose it, but then you're not killing your airflow because you have ventilation all the way through. So although it is going to impact airflow a little bit, it's not going to completely block it off if this were a single like solid piece. And you have ventilation on the side of this cage as well. So there's a lot of thought right there when it comes to airflow. We've got about 22 millimeters or so of clearance when it comes to this plate right here and the glass. Because we are dealing with glass, that means there's no additional pop out or cut out in the back panel that can sometimes pop out some to give you more cable management thickness. Because it's glass, it's just gonna be solid there. And because you have that door, clearly, as long as you can get it all to squish within that door, your glass panel will stay on. This panel right here goes behind the motherboard. This gives you additional spot to mount 2.5-inch drives or RGB controllers or whatever else you may potentially be putting on here. You've got room for 3 drives there. Captive thumb screw, and it does pop out. Integrated cable channeling right here for with Velcro straps for all of your cable management. Now you can see down here the amount of space we have for said power supply. And as you can see, the bottom is full mesh as well. Because we are dealing with having our fans in this middle compartment here, there will be a volume of air for it to pull through. The fans are also going to be a little bit obstructed by the PSU. So I'm going to be seeing how much space we have between the PSU and this fan right here, because this PSU is going to be blocking this intake right here. So now we're going to be limited to more or less this front half, depending on the length of your GPU, or more or less the front 2/3 to pull in air to supply air to our 3 120 millimeter fans. Now it does only support 120 mil fans on the bottom and the top and the back, so no 140s. I need to point that out, that's important. And then we do have some integrated cable channeling right here. This is for plugging in like obviously your USB devices, your DisplayPort, HDMI cable, whatever. So where all your cables plug into your motherboard can stay nice and tidy right here. So this comes out to allow you to mount your fans and whatnot to that, and then you can slide that back in just like that. Like this is like a 95% porosity. Like this is just pretty much for all intents and purposes, full open airflow. It means your cable management down the bottom is gonna need to be tidy. Otherwise you're gonna be able to see it through that. Now obviously if you're running fans in there, and we'll use these as an example, these are actually the M25-120 reverse blade. So that's kind of nice because it means we won't be looking at oh, I hate these packages so much. We won't be looking at a gross fan hub. We'll be looking at our fan blades, which are much prettier to look at in any scenario. There we go. So that would be a lot nicer to look at than a nice open area. Now it does also use what they call Next Link, and that's what this cable is right here. This is, as you can see, is a very proprietary cable. It carries both the PWM and the ARGB signal. It should have a breakout cable. Yep, here we go right here. So the breakout cable gives us an adapter to convert it to, say you don't have a hub, you can convert it to the standard either JST plug with the PWM fan header or the standard ARGB header. This is, and it's funny, this is actually backwards because JST is actually the standard and the motherboard 3-pin is actually not the standard, but that's kind of being referred to as the standard. This is kind of nice to see because the Phanteks fans in the past didn't used to include an adapter or even this header. So you were stuck having to use either their ecosystem or find an adapter to be able to plug this into your motherboard or device or whatever. So that's kind of nice to see. This is just an extension cable, actually technically 2 extension cables, because they are daisy chainable and linked to either their Next Link hub, which is right here. I don't know if I'm gonna necessarily use this in this build. I am anti-hub. I like to keep things just hooked up to the motherboard as much as possible. But here's their hub right here, which allows you to plug in any of the Next Link devices. It's fairly small. Like it's not that intrusive, although it does require a 6-pin PCI Express to power, which is nice because that allows more amps and more solid power delivery than say using SATA. And then you have a standard USB device that plugs into the motherboard. That way you can get the signals. Unfortunately, that also means that you're gonna have to run their software and such. So for this build today, I think I'm gonna try and do this without using this if possible. Otherwise, I just kicked the glass. Otherwise, we'll be coming back and figuring out how to hook that stuff up. Now let's talk about clearances. It's a fairly decent mid-tower case in terms of size, but when it comes to like your radiators, up to 360 millimeter clearances, top and bottom we already showed. 380 millimeter GPU width, or length, GPU width 178 millimeters, so pretty much everything will fit within this, the 5090, the 4090, even the custom 4090 cards and whatnot. CPU cooler height up to 170 millimeters, so even your big like Noctua D15s and all that are gonna fit in here. And it has a 5-year limited warranty. Okay, we need to build in this. What I'm gonna do is instead of doing a fill montage, which admittedly you all love watching, I am going to kind of take you through each component as we build in this, and we'll show you any nuances that we find along the way. If it just goes in, great. If it doesn't, we'll talk about it. And in terms of motherboard support and stuff, I want to point this out. It does also support MSI's Project Zero and ASUS VTF. That is what these cutouts technically are for, so that any of the front to back type of connections on the motherboards that are starting to become more popular are supported here. So definitely worth pointing that out. Otherwise, you just have a giant grommet that hangs over the side. You could EATX this bad boy up if you want. It would just hang off the side, which is technically fine, but you could do that. Let's go ahead and start building in this. So the motherboard I'm using here, this is the X670 Aorus. Isn't not an Extreme, right? Oh, it is. It's the Aorus Elite, but it's not X870E. So it's an ATX board, not an EATX. 7950X3D is in there. As you can see, installing it's really easy when you take the front glass out, which we figured out how it comes out. You undo those 2 screws and it slides out sideways, so that's kind of nice. The standoffs are pre-installed on this, so as long as you line them up, everything plops down exactly in place. Now the screws are included in this little screw container. Phanteks is really known for giving you the screw divider. They're already separated based on their type, so that's a nice to have. A ton of extra screws in case you need them. Now one thing worth pointing out is the hole right here for the EPS power perfectly lines up with the EPS power. Thanks to the Project Zero BTF type support, it's also a very large opening in the back. So it'd be very easy to route cables in here. Obviously, because of the fact that we need to deal with, that we have an AIO that's gonna be going here, we should run these cables first. So this is the Phanteks Revolt 1000. Again, sent to support the case working in the build. I want to point something out here real quick. Power supplies have definitely been getting smaller throughout the years. Like, God, you would never find a power supply that was 1,000 watts and this small back in the day, which is nice because that means it won't cover up as much of the bottom ventilation as we kind of need to leave open. So you can see we do have potentially about 1/3 though of our mid-plate fan grill somewhat covered. Let me get this in there and you'll see. That's not a problem as long as we have enough of a gap between, get on there. As long as we have enough of a gap between the power supply and the grill. So you can see about how much of it's covered right there. It's not terrible, but it does impede. And if we take a look at this side, we have approximately 10 millimeters of gap between the power supply and the fan. It's not the most optimal, but it's also not the most terrible. So put that into a scientific measurement of however you feel. So regarding the mid-plate fans, we obviously have some cables we need to deal with. So I'm using the breakout cable, like I said, that goes to a standard PWM and the JST/standard header. I don't want to use the controller if I don't have to. It does have a channel right here, right there, that you can just run the wires through. So that's kind of nice. Obviously it sticks out all the way to the backside. And I think it's important to show this because as you prepare for your cable management and stuff, you know, I'm not gonna leave this in right now because I haven't plugged in my power supply cables. And it's actually kind of nice that by leaving that out, I can have my power supply in there and still access my cables. Obviously with this nut there right now, I could still access them this way. But I think it makes sense to put this in as one of the last pieces because that would be a lot easier than trying to plug them in that way. I can just go in through the top. But as you can see though, because of that cable channel right there, the wires are just completely non-visible, which is awesome. I like the way they thought that out. What's unique about the Revolve Revolt power supply. We actually had one of these. I think we have a 1200 watt one. Actually, yeah, it's 1200. You can buy them without the cables. It says cable sold separately. The reason for that is they do sell cable kits that allow you to get cables that are sleeved and such in the colors that you want. Or they just know that a lot of people will run a custom cable kit. So like with Cable Mod or something like that. So they will do this to try and save costs without including cables. So if you know you're gonna buy a power supply, custom cable set, you can buy the power supply without the cables and save a few bucks. But then if you do get theirs, you can see the main cable harnesses that matter are sleeved in this sort of a paracord sleeve. So this is our 12 volt high power. This is our 24 pin. This is our EPS. And then our PCI Express are also sleeved, but they just put the standard Molex and SATA cables in there because those are on the backside. You never really see them anyway. But this is like a soft paracord type of sleeve. And then as you can see, again, this isn't even about their power supply, it's just because I'm using it, I'm showing it. It has the integrated cable combs already sleeved. This is aluminum. So I'm gonna go ahead and wire the cables in now. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the 12 volt high power in. I got the main harness kind of wired coming out right here. I want to point out, I said these might have been plastic. They are indeed aluminum cable combs, which is really nice. And you can see the one for the 12 volt 2x6 has the hump and indent right there for the sense wires, which is important. The sense wires can be kind of delicate. So I think keeping them, you know, out of the way so that they're not damaged is important. I am using only the zip ties and Velcro straps and stuff that came with the case to do this build in terms of cable management and whatnot. So you can see I have some of the Velcro straps right here to sort of keep my main harness together. And I am using some zip ties to keep like the end of the harness where I'm not using the cable combs together so I can keep it nice and tidy. Cables that are included obviously for the front panel, you got your standard USB 3.0, which is a double kind of a flat cable style, a very thin, very floppy USB-C. Obviously we have our case lighting plug, which is a standard JST, or at least their JST style, with a daisy chain or pigtail, but it also comes with this adapter. So again, you don't have to use the, not included, but the optional Next Link box. I personally, like I said already, and I'll say it again, I don't like controller boxes. To me personally, they add clutter and such. But I do really appreciate that Phanteks allows you to break out of the ecosystem and use the headers on your motherboards to control their devices. But I think right now is a good time to start doing cable management. One thing I want to point out too as we move forward when I get to the AIO, well, you'll see why in a moment. You have to separate your fans and your radiator on both sides of the bracket because there's not enough room when it hangs down without interfering with the motherboard. It doesn't offset it. So you can see that our radiator would definitely impact our cables right here. All right, so here's the cable management. 24 pin is in, EPS, both EPS are in. 12 volt high power is just kind of hanging out right here because I need to figure out exactly where I'm gonna route that through yet. I don't even know what card I'm gonna throw in here yet. But the cable management's done. You can see what it looks like on this side right here. It's very clean. Nothing shows over here on this side. 24 pin bend is kind of aggressive. It doesn't look bad. I have the cable combs keeping it from fanning out. So little fun fact here. If you throw a little twist in your cable in the same direction that it wants to fan, it will pull things tighter on the outside so they don't try and like open up and flare. So put a little twist in there and that's what usually helps with that. But what I want to test now, as I said, is the AIO. In the double stack config, where it's hanging down below the bracket entirely, to see if I have enough clearance to do it this way. So I really got to push that down. So if you look at the top, you can see we still have a lot of room before we get that all the way down. Yeah, that's just not gonna go. So now what we need to do is I'm gonna put the radiator on the top of the metal plate and let the fans be on the bottom of the metal plate. And then we're gonna sandwich them, the plate in between the two. Okay, so preparing to do the sandwich method, I wanna point out this bracket is not symmetrical. It's actually shorter on this end than this end. And it's actually wider to accommodate the tubing and the fill port right here. This is the vacuum fill that they use at the factory. So you have to go one direction. And that frustrates me because I wanted to go this way. That way I could have the tubing on this end and then bring it back around. But this is going to force the tubing on this side because this bracket only goes one way because of the hold down screw. So I'm not keen on that idea of having to have the tubes this way, because what it means now is I'm going to kind of have this sort of a, I guess it's not too crazy, but it might impede a little bit on touching the GPU. But I just wanted to point that out. Because of this fill port, it won't line up going this way. That keeps it from being able to move over to line up that hole. So I'm about to mount the cooler down. I just zip tied it to the extension hole from the daisy chain, how they're screwed together. It goes up through this hole here in the bracket, and then above the bracket, the wires can just actually manage through there. So we're not pinching any wires anywhere. There's plenty of room. I guess I'll probably end up going like that. That way I'm not dealing with the tubes hitting the GPU. So this video is not about the cooler, but it's important to point out the way this cooler is designed, and specifically because it's AMD, Intel you can rotate 90 degrees because the bracket for Intel is a square. AMD is a rectangle. So what that means is because of the way the tubes are coming out, I have no choice but to put the pump tubes on the right side closest to the RAM, which unfortunately overhangs the RAM slot closest to the pump because they stick so far out the side. Now you might be thinking, Jay, why don't you just turn it so they're on this side? Well, because I have such a giant VRM heatsink on this motherboard, it impacts the heatsink before they line up with the screw post to be able to mount it down. So this particular layout, this particular combination of hardware means we would lose our 4th RAM slot. So you got to keep that in mind. This is very much a specific nuance of this board with this CPU, motherboard manufacturer, AM5 in this case, and this AIO. So you need to keep that in mind. Okay, so since I misplaced the tube separators somewhere around here, I just used one of the Velcros to kind of hold it together. You don't even need to. I just did it to kind of, I guess, show that you could. I did run out of zip ties and Velcro straps in the back, so a couple of the wires, I'm just using the twist ties to hold together. This is all the wiring, everything's in. I didn't even need the SATA cable after all, because this is just a breakout to SATA. If for some reason you don't have a high amp header for like AIOs or water pumps, this board does have one, so I'm using that instead of this. Don't need that. All that's left now is to put in the graphics card. And I guess we'll figure out what graphics card I'm gonna throw in here. I mean, this, as you might recognize, is an RTX 5090. And I think it would look great in here. I can go that far to show you what it looks like in there. I'm not allowed to socket it in, even though I was already allowed to do a video with the build and turning it on. But you can see what it looks like in there. Looks pretty cool. There's that part. Anyway, this is a 4080 Super. I grabbed this one though because it looks, I mean, with it being all black, it would look really good with the build. But I'm really curious now as to cable clearance on side panel. That's why the 5090 I think would have been fun to show in here, because the angled connector changes everything regarding the height of the cables and such. But okay, oh, I guess the bracket was already at the perfect height because it's like supporting it already. I like this approach to covering up the slots than having that stupid thing a lot of case manufacturers like to do where you have the little cover back here. It's like pointless, but this actually looks pretty good. So there it is. And it does look to me like there is plenty of clearance here for the cable. I even moved one of the combs really close to the end of the cable to keep it from being able to pull out too hard. Pull out game on point, 4090, 4080, not a good idea. So with that said, that's the build. I guess I have to do the final touches of taking off the little covers on the fans here. And then we need to fire it up because I want to hear the acoustics of this case. This is a pretty neat build. Phil and I were actually talking about, like, we think even just having it open like this and putting the door on would be a pretty neat, quote unquote, open air chassis. You could totally leave it open. Like, you don't even have to put the glass back on if you didn't want to. I like how this has just ended up in the perfect position for that card. I like that. I like that a lot. Even just open chassis, that's cool. So I want to talk about the plastic real quick on the glass. I think there's an inside one on here I have to take off too. One of my biggest complaints about when companies put this protective plastic on, to take off the inside one here. Not only is the electric static it's gonna cause, but when they put like a warning sticker, like we have a couple of warnings on here, right? Warning, tempered glass, or warning, remove screw for top first, etc. They'll put them under the plastic, like the protective plastic film, but Phanteks puts it the stickers on top of the plastic. Oh my God, you don't have to sit there scraping it off and get residue and get your goo gone and all that crap. It just comes off with it. So thank you for that. Ow, dang it. I knew it was gonna happen. All the static electricity and it's dry and windy today. So there is still a little bit of a buffer of space right here. Probably about a good 10 or 12 millimeters between the top of the rad to where this is. Now this will take up some of that space because you can see the grill mesh kind of protrudes down into that compartment. So we had no other choice but to mount it this way. That's why I thought it'd be a fun ride to take you guys along for the build. Like we show what builds look like in cases, but we've never taken you along for the ride during the build to show you some of the nuances as we're dealing with it. So yeah, as you can see, it is a very pretty case. Probably the most useless glass panel on the back, but it's kind of neat to see it all uniformed. You know, we've had the fish tanks, right? We've had the microwaves. Phil dubbed this one the coffee maker. He said it looked like a coffee maker because of the double stack. Anyway, let's fire it up. It's kind of hard to see, but there's that RGB strip we talked about. There's one inside the case as well that goes along in there, that little piece. And then I don't think anything on the back. Nope, nothing on the back. Oh, and up here. So that's the integrated case lighting. And it's all being controlled off the motherboard right now. So that is a very, very clean build, in my opinion. Very subtle too. Like the only RGB, or the only glowing light at all on the 4080 Super is the GeForce logo, and then only half the X glows on the 40 series. The 50 series, the whole X glows, which is kind of neat. Heck, even the motherboard doesn't have any lighting as far as I can tell. I mean, you can see like, it's just a visual, but there's a severe amount of static pressure coming out through the rad. Now once I put on the filter, still a fair amount of pressure. It's just coming out at an angle now instead of straight up. So we hear how the top fans are. I know it's very difficult to hear because you're picking it up through my lav mic, but I want to see now. We can do a side-by-side comparison. So I'll go full speed once again on the top fans. This is a very unscientific test. It's the only thing I have to show you right now though. So I'm gonna stand right here, approximately not even 3 feet away from the computer. I'm gonna go full speed on the top fans. And then what we'll do is we'll put it back to normal and we'll go full speed on the mid plate fan so you can see the difference in tone between the two. Okay, so now we'll do the same thing with mid-plate fans, which right now are running 800 RPM. Okay, so the top fans, if you compare them side by side, if Phil goes back and forth between the clips, the top fans definitely have more of a turbulent sound to them because the air is making constant direction changes. It's going through the fins, then it's going through this, and then it's going through this angled slat coming out the top. So every time air makes a direction change, you're gonna get some of that turbulent sound. Fortunately, even at low RPM right here, there's a lot of airflow. Like even at 900 RPM, you can see, look, it's levitating the blue towel. I know this is very non-scientific, there it goes. It's very non-scientific, but my point is I can still feel the cushion of air even at low RPM. So you don't have to put these fans to full speed. Obviously, it's just nice to know that I hit the button. It's nice to know that if you needed to, and that's gonna be a problem too, by the way, if you're ever in your system or whatever, and you're taking the top off and you're trying to clean your filter or something while the system's running, when you put it back on, you're probably gonna push down the power button and turn your system off. So keep that in mind if you're working on that. In terms of the bottom filter, it comes out the front, thank God. So it's the length of the bottom intake, and because it comes out the front, you can easily clean that. It's up to you if you want to run it or not. I'm the kind of person that doesn't run fan filters. I want all the cooling I can possibly get. But there you go. I mean, this was more or less a ride along of building in the case. I can't give you any actual performance figures on it because I don't have anything to compare it to anyway. I would be able to give you a performance like temperature over delta, or delta over ambient, which would just tell you how much warmer it is inside than the outside air. I need to figure out the methodology I want to use to be able to do this type of testing. So it's all going to be new to me. But more importantly, the nuances of building in the case I was able to show you, which is something that I was interested in because of the fact that there's no motherboard, like fan wall or anything there, like how do the cables route. I think it's all very well thought out. So anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I know that it looks like I have an OS on there, but I don't, because that's just a bootloader. The OS is actually on a different drive that is not in the system. So yeah, I have a lot of work to do to get ready for these case reviews. But cost, that's the one last thing we'll talk about. I didn't talk about it in the beginning because one, I didn't know the number. I had to reach out and get what that was. And two, cost and value are subjective. It's one of those things where some people have deep pockets and the price of a case may not seem like that big of a deal. Other people might be building on a very strict budget and every $10 matters. This case actually comes in at $149.99, which is cheaper than the Evolv, the original Evolv was. So this is obviously a much better case than the original Evolv. It's got more room inside of it. It's got more airflow. And I think at $149, it's going to be very competitive. Now it's $159 for the white. There's a white and silver version. White usually costs more because they have lower quantities of those that they order, so they don't get as, like, the MOQs on that are less aggressive. Well, actually more aggressive, meaning they cost more at a lower quantity. So black usually outsells white like 95 to 5. Like every 100 cases, like 5 would be white, 95 would be black. It's some crazy figure like that. So for $149 though, I think it's pretty damn competitive. But that's where you guys have to sound off how you think $149 case stacks up, like what other cases you would compare it to. I think Fractal Design is going to have some cases in this price point. NZXT obviously has cases in this price point. It's a competitive stack, but it's refreshing to see some divergence here from the typical either dual chamber case or the fish tank look. Enter the era of the coffee maker.